Hello there, I am Amanda, and this is my home. This has been my home for a long time. I have lived in a van for almost 9 years, and today is a big day for us. Today is the anniversary of bringing Truck home. Truck is this van. Truck is a 1994 GMC Vandura extended wheelbase, so it's a little longer than normal. And today marks the 6-year anniversary of making this van home. So I thought this is the perfect anniversary to take you for a little story time of the history of this van from start to finish, when it was just an empty cargo van with no name and no personality, all the way until now, which I have now lived in this van for 6 years. I have built it and renovated it and painted it and engine swap and so many things. So I'm going to tell you all about those things today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up some old photos. I'm going to walk you through the process of the initial build, because that all happened before I was on YouTube and I've had so many questions about it. So I want to show you what's behind these walls and just bring you through this journey with us and talk about my love of this van. That's going to be today's video. But real quick, if you're new here, this is Frank. He is an Australian cattle dog mix who I rescued about 6 months before embarking on van life. He has been a most tolerant companion to my shenanigans and this unpredictable life on the road. And he has been what has made these adventures so incredibly special all this time. So if you'd like to come along for our adventures, please hit that subscribe button. Now let's get back to the beginning. So before I lived in this van, I lived in a minivan for more than 2 years. And it was fine. I loved it. I really enjoyed my little home. But spending October on Haida Gwaii, it got pretty stormy. And you couldn't open a door without, like, the whole inside of my house getting wet. And I just started to feel really crammed. The van was breaking in a lot of ways. It was nearing the end of its life. And so it was really, really wearing on me. And the idea of going into another winter in a minivan with no heat, it's all just windows, it just didn't sit well with me. And so I was visiting my parents, and my dad found this van on Craigslist, I believe. And what had happened is somebody had bought the van brand new, used it as a work truck for many years, traded it in for a new Ford. The Ford dealership didn't want it, obviously. It's a GMC, it's an old GMC. So they sold it to an auctioneer. And so in the week that it was sitting in the lot waiting to go to auction, they had put it up on Craigslist. My dad found it. It was a great deal. I got this van for $2,600 Canadian. It had 142,000 kilometers on it. The frame was in good shape. The underbody was in good shape. Everything else could be fixed. So I went for it. And if I'm completely honest, I had buyer's remorse for close to a year. I had made living in a minivan such a big part of my identity, I didn't even realize. I felt like such a sellout when I got this van, when I had all this space, when I could be comfortable inside, when I could sit up straight. In the minivan, the roof was like this. I was always hunched. And so yeah, it actually took me quite a while to learn to love this van. So the first thing I did after getting truck was I took it to get all the fluids flushed. The van had not been well looked after, so it really needed that, and it needed new tires. And then I headed over to the island where my grandfather lives. My grandfather had been a carpenter for decades, and we started out the build process together. When I initially built out this van, there wasn't near as much information online about DIY van builds as there is today. But that really didn't matter because I didn't do any research before embarking on my van build. I lived in a van full time for nearly 3 years, so when I got truck, I just spent some time hanging out in it empty and drew up a layout that I thought would work well for me. And then after picking up our first load of supplies, I did a deep cleaning and started on the floor, which is very simple. It's just some cedar slats and foam board covered with plywood. And so far that is working very well. After getting the floor in place, which is what we would build everything square to, I started on the walls. The wall insulation is a combination of spray can foam in all the crevices and then bagged fiberglass insulation. And there's these metal ribs that run vertically down the van that are like structural support. And so I put horizontal slats of wood screwed into those that would hold the insulation in place, as well as later provide a mounting point for the 1/4-inch plywood walls. Once I got most of the insulation in on one side, I actually painted the floor, the plywood floor, because if plywood gets moisture like into it, it will mold very easily. So it was important to seal that. So I put several coats of paint on the floor. So with the fiberglass insulation in on both sides, I moved on to the roof, and I did it pretty similar to the floor. There was some ribs running across the top I attached some wood slats into, and then we just filled it with foam board, spray can foam, and then a layer of moisture barrier before screwing up the rest of the cedar lumber. So the ceiling is actually just dimensional lumber. I sanded down one side, and it was pretty tight when it started, but the cedar has since dried quite a bit more, and I have pretty noticeable gaps now, which is kind of funny because that's turned out to be like an aesthetic people go for. So with the ceiling in place, I realized I had a whole bunch of extra foam board, so I just put the foam board in the walls between all the slats, like in front of the fiberglass insulation. And then we screwed on the plywood for the walls, and I coated it in a water-based varathane just to like prevent any moisture from soaking into the plywood. And with that, the shell of the van was done pretty quickly. I would say that took us like 2 weeks max, less than 2 weeks. So pretty simple when you're not doing any sort of wiring or plumbing or cutting holes for windows or cutting holes for vents. I didn't have money for any of those types of things. As it is, just buying the van and this very basic build, which at the time lumber was much cheaper, that basically cost me every penny I had in the bank and available on credit. So I didn't have a lot of extra funds at the time, and it was more important for me just to get my new van built out and get back to adventuring than to delay the entire process to make it something fancier. And having come from a minivan, I really just didn't need a lot. I was pretty used to a pretty bare bones setup, and so already with insulation, it was quite a big step up compared to before. The rear wheel wells I just covered in Reflectix and then boxed in with plywood, which I later painted, and any gaps within the plywood box I just filled with spray can foam. So with that done, it was just a matter of shaping the last piece of cedar to go up on the ceiling where it merges with the wall. So with all that done, it was time to move on to the fun stuff, starting with the bed at the back, which is a pretty simple design. Most of it is accessible storage from the rear doors with a latch for a bit of access from within the van. So we got pretty lucky with this next step of the build because my grandpa found a table saw for free on the side of the road that allowed us to avoid using any sort of hardware and instead have 1/4-inch plywood doors that would slide in the grooves that we cut on the wood. So the whole cabinet is framed with cedar, and then the doors are the same 1/4-inch ply as the walls. I can't remember which type of wood it is, but it's all built in place with the end cap put on last after the doors were slid in. So at this point, the van was starting to take shape, which was pretty exciting. So we moved on to the second and final cabinet, which was also a countertop. We built it with the same design as the first one, with sliding drawers in grooves cut with the table saw, and built it right in place. At this point, we were maybe 3 weeks into the build, and I had it completely insulated, walled in, and the 3 structures I intended to build built. Moving forward, there was just a couple odds and ends, like filling some holes in the countertop and finishing that surface, but I was already starting to move in. Apparently, the first thing I moved in was my climbing gear and some camping gear. I built this nifty little countertop rack to hold my cutlery and some jars of tea. And then we just kind of quickly finished up those pesky back corners by gluing some vinyl over top of the pieces of plywood that we had covered the insulation with. But yeah, at this point I was 3.5 weeks into the build. My grandpa and I worked together full time, 7 days a week for those 3.5 weeks. And because it was such a simple build, we were able to get done pretty quick, which is nice because I was ready to hit the road. And so the first thing that I did was drive over to the West Coast, where I was hit with a snowstorm and enjoyed a pretty cold first few days trapped in a parking lot. After that, I ended up taking truck down south. We headed down to California, Eastern California, to climb, hang out in Bishop, and just enjoy the desert and being dry. And it was so nice, but I definitely had some mechanical issues to work out. I would always have mechanical issues to work out. And I knew that getting this van, I knew that it would be one thing after another until everything was fixed. And then I could probably just start all over again. But I have learned so much through having this van, because it is the type of engine and lack of computerization that allows me to learn and do it myself instead of having to go to the mechanic every time. So my first 6-ish months in this van, I still cooked outside on the ground on my camp stove, just like I had done living in my minivan for years before. And then spring came around and I was visiting my grandpa, and we finally installed the flip-up table on my side door where I cook, where I still cook. That is my kitchen. I like cooking outside. I don't want all the smells in here. I don't want all the steam and the grease and all of that. The system I have works for me. It's just really nice to be off the ground, and I can sit in the doorway or stand and cook and not be squatting. So installing the flip-up table on the side door would be the first of an endless series of tiny projects that brings me to today, but aren't done, and will keep going. Always. That's just the way I am, and I just don't believe a van is ever truly done. I think as you live in it and you grow and you change, your needs and desires grow and change with you, and so you change your home, and that's a really nice thing to be able to do. And because it's a small space, it's relatively affordable. But one of the next projects I did was I put up a shelf here. It has since been moved to the back corner. It is my serenity shelf, I call it. So I think the shelf was here when I did my first van tour. That was before I was on YouTube or anything, but I did a van tour with Forrest Stevens of Different Media. So I will link that, and you can see in detail what my van was like at that time. And this whole main space, nothing was really fixed, so it was very fluid and things would change quite often, and it served us very well for years that way. And I never had running water. I still don't have running water. I don't need running water, and I personally believe that a sink is a huge waste of space in a van. You can just put water in a pot, boom, sink. I just don't feel for me, I value a sink enough to give it that space. Same with cooking inside. I like cooking outside, and if I don't want to go outside and I want to eat, I make salad, I make sandwiches, I make wraps, I have chips and salsa, or I make anything that just involves boiling water, which I do inside on a little canister stove. So I make quick soup and stuff. So it has always worked for me to not have a fixed kitchen inside either, which it frees up a lot of space, and it made the build so much more affordable. In December of 2019, I left Canada again and headed down through Idaho and Montana, and back into Idaho, and then into Utah, all of which was very cold, but it was nice because it was quiet. And then I ended up in Colorado for a brief moment before finally deciding to go somewhere warm and heading into New Mexico, where I met up with some van friends from back home in Squamish, and we road tripped together for a little bit through New Mexico and through southern Arizona, which was really, really nice. And then we parted ways and I headed north through Arizona into Sedona and then Flagstaff, at which point the world was starting to get a little weird. And I headed west into Nevada, where I had a quick visit with my aunt. And then when she went home, the world really started to lock down. And I headed north into the desert of Nevada, where I parked in the same spot for 50 days, just waiting to see what would happen. And because I had always gotten power from driving or cafes, I no longer had access to get any power. So my aunt actually had me sent a Goal Zero bank and solar panel. And since I had phone service there, that allowed me to stay connected and to keep like sharing my experience. So that was really super appreciated. And then my visa ran up and I had no choice but to head back to Canada. So I traveled through Oregon, spent a bit of time camped out with a friend, and then returned to Canada where I found this crate. And I turned this crate into a food box and a seat and an outside table. And I really love this crate. It's still in my van to this day, but it was time to make some money working on a cherry farm because my van had gotten extremely rusty. It was in dire need of some repairs. And I figured since I was going to do all the work of sanding and repairing the rust, I might as well paint it the color I really want it, which is green. And so with huge help from my dad, we worked through my van section by section. I did almost all of the sanding and rust treatment and any sort of dismantling that needed to occur. And he did the body filler and priming and painting. And 6 weeks later, I had a beautiful green van. I painted the inside of the side doors the wonderful purple, but I could not get enough of that color paint, so I did some funky stuff on the back doors that actually brings me a lot of joy. It was way nicer than looking at white metal doors from the inside. And then the last thing was to put on the rack that my dad had built for my minivan, but we modded it for my van, and truck became externally the van that you know of today. And it's kind of, I was looking through my photos and I feel like I spent a lot of time documenting the painting process, but like I just couldn't find much for photos. I don't know if I had it split between hard drives, but I thought I had a bunch of videos because I shared so much of this process in Instagram stories and it all just like disappeared, and that was really disappointing. And that made me realize that my time creating could be better invested in YouTube videos. And so that was really what got like the wheels turning for me to take this long time dream of making YouTube videos seriously. And so I got my first like little phone tripod and I started practicing carrying my phone around on the tripod and filming. And it took several months, but then I started my channel. And you've been able to come along with my adventures ever since then, which has been really great. And you've seen my van go through some horrible mechanical issues and get hit by a vehicle and just a lot of stress, but also a lot of love poured into it. So it was a year after we did the paint job that me and my dad did the engine swap together, and I learned so much about my van through that. I really have become confident as a mechanic when it comes to this van, this engine, and this kind of like GMC Chevy for like a few decades until they got really modernized, I'm pretty comfortable with. But you're not gonna like see me hopping into like a Honda and like taking the reins to fix anything. Like I just I'm kind of like a one-trick pony when it comes to mechanics, but I documented that whole process on YouTube, so I don't want to go too much into the engine swap now. And so truck had gone through quite a transformation at this point, 5 years in, from a neglected cargo van to a home, to a green home that's reliable with a good engine, and that I just really have grown attached to. And then came the first major internal change, which was building the box to house my heater, because I had lived through 8 winters at this point without heat in my van. And although I'm able to tolerate it and, you know, it's not the worst thing. I mean, as I'm recording this, I'm without heat, but we will get to that in the next video. But I was gifted a heater and it was so incredibly nice. And so I had to install that. And so I will link the video, I think here, or it might go there, but I think, or one of these two. I'm not sure how this works. And it's all in one video. You can watch the install of the heater. My dad is like super safety guy, so it's like a very beefy install. So if you're thinking of installing a diesel heater, I recommend watching that. But this box was also intended to house my future power system, because although I had a deep cycle battery in there to run the heater, it would not actually power my life now that like I'm creating. And you need warmth and power, because if you don't have warmth but you have power, your batteries go really fast, as I've been reminded these past few days. So having heat and a place to sit on at the front of the van really started to change how I interacted with my van. And then I got a new hobby, paddleboarding. And I didn't really have anywhere to store my paddleboard, and my van just kind of got overwhelmed with clutter, and I wasn't really able to use the spaces the way I wanted to. I really wanted to spend more time hanging out up here. As you can see, I can do now. I'm sitting on my bed. And so this past spring, I embarked on a renovation project that ended up being way bigger than I expected, and I thought I could summarize in this video, and I definitely can't. But this is what my van looked like before, after I cleared out all that stuff. And I left 2 out of 3 of the original structures and just removed the old desk. And then I refinished the floor and the walls, and then built my new bed. And from there I built my new desk, and then I've added a bunch of little things. And so in another video, I will do a full van tour, because there are so many little things about this van that I am so excited on, and everything has its own little reason for being the way it is. And I want to share all of that without being rushed. So as you can see, my van has come a long ways. I have my precious Frankie here. He absolutely loves having the bed by the side window, so we can enjoy the view and the sunlight, without having to get up in the morning, because it is quite a bit darker at the back of the van. But yeah, this is the journey of Truck. We're 6 years in. The day I brought him home was October 31st, 2016. So Halloween. And so autumn is always a really special time for me, because it just reminds me of the start of this journey that me and this van have had together. And it always feels like a really big time of transformation and letting go of things that no longer serve, like my minivan, and moving forward in ways that are better for me, better for my health and my mental well-being and my spine. I love being able to straighten my spine inside. Yeah. Thank you for coming along with this journey. It means so much to me. It's been really fun to look through all these old photos, and it's really put a lot into perspective for me of like how far I've come, and also has made me realize like the mental strength that I have developed these years living in a van and living without heat and living without, you know, an actual power source or water, or you know, basically just living like I'm camping all the time. And I'm really grateful for it. And I don't wish I had a fancier van, and I don't wish I had a shower or anything like that. I'm really content with with my van, how it is. And yeah, I look forward to showing you more around this new build. And yeah, please give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you haven't already. I got a cute clip of Frankie to send you off on your way, and we'll see you in the next video where I will talk about why I don't have heat anymore.